Li Wan covers China and its foreign relations for the New York Times, and she's joining us from New York. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
So, because you keep an eye on all this, even though you're doing it from the United States, what are the most important signals that you're picking up from inside China, the government and the people, about what's happening?
It seems to me the government is now determined to show that it's willing to fight to the end. That's what the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman said the other day. And on the Chinese internet, a lot of nationalistic bloggers are saying, the U.S. has declared a war on China, and they are talking about, we are willing to fight to the end as well. And it's a lot of things are going on. But interestingly, last night, while I was scrolling on the Chinese social media Weibo, and there's a hashtag saying like America is going to impose 104% tariffs on China, and all of a sudden that hashtag disappeared. And we're not sure, what it means. And also like the 104%, the tariffs, of the American tariffs on China, that 104% is also censored. And also, I found a photo of, it's a mocked photo, it's an AI photo of Trump, Vance, and Elon Musk are working on the Nike assembly line. And I tried to send it to a few friends in a WeChat group, and it didn't go through. So there are lots of signals.
Signals, and I guess China is trying to manage it by allowing some protest and cracking down on some other. Do you think it's strange that China is now claiming to be the rule follower and accusing the United States of being the rule breaker, when certainly the West has a lot of issues, obviously, with China's sometimes often unfair trade practices and its IP practices? How is this going to play out, do you think, in China's favor or in the U.S.?
I think it's very hard to say. I'm trying to talk to some Chinese experts, and they're like, I really don't know how it's going to play out. I don't really want to talk about it too much. And it's, it's definitely a game of chicken, right? It's the U.S. is, Trump is not backing down, and he's saying like, be cool. And China is like, we will retaliate if you impose more. And it's really hard to say where it is going. But in the end, I think, one aspect is that China has demonstrated it has the will, it has the will to keep going. And also, it's the Chinese government has had the history of making people to endure a lot of hardships, right? And it's a question about which government can make its people to endure hardship. And remember, during the Great Famine, the Great Leap Forward, tens of millions of Chinese were starved to death because Chairman Mao was determined to industrial China in a few years or in a few decades. And, and then in the Cultural Revolution, and Chairman Mao also, millions of people died because Chairman Mao was trying to grasp power, to consolidate his power. And also, in the past few years, China's economy has been in trouble, and the youth unemployment rate has been very high. And Xi Jinping told the young people, you should eat bitterness, you should deal with it. And I think in terms of like the government's will to make its people to go through a lot of difficulties, I don't think the U.S. government can beat the Chinese government.
Okay, so that's really interesting. We heard from the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, today. He was in some kind of conference or talking somewhere, and he basically tried to say, well, actually, we and the rest of the world, Europe, we should all band together against China and have a strong economy, all of us, and essentially punish China for what we believe are its unfair trade practices. Do you think there's, you've said, and China, that yes, yes, it's a dictatorship and they can tell their people to endure any amount of hardship. But do you think they might be worried that the whole world will band against them?
Yeah, the Chinese President Xi Jinping held a meeting with his top deputies last night, I believe, and he told them, we should enhance our ties with our neighbors and we should build up supply chain cooperation, industrial cooperation. And the Chinese government has been trying to cozy up with Europe and Japan and South Korea and has been saying all the right things, right? I read a Xinhua commentary last week. I was like, I've never agreed with the Chinese government so much, talking about how to be a responsible stakeholder and all that. But at the same time, we should also know that China's Asian neighbors are very worried about China's excessive exports, and Europe has been complaining about how much Chinese exports they're getting, and now basically the U.S. and China. U.S. has been a very important export market for China and probably the highest profit margin. And now China has to find markets elsewhere. But, it has been saying all the right things. But I really think there's a lot of suspicion about the Chinese government and whether it's really willing to do business on a base of rule of law.
Yeah, well, let's talk about rule of law, okay? Because most analysts believe that rule of law, the adhering to proper rules of the road, democratic institutions, is not only good for your nation, but also good for your economy. So I'm very interested that you wrote one of your recent columns talking about how you're hearing from people in China when Trump started to swerve, let's say, against Ukraine and towards Russia, and then all the other things that have been unfolding in the United States. You were hearing, and then Tom Friedman, your colleague, has written recently after a visit there, that high-level and low-level Chinese are asking, hold on a second, is America having its own kind of cultural revolution, the Mao cultural revolution that we just talked about?
Yeah, there are a lot of talks on Chinese social media and in private conversations about, what's going on in the U.S. They're like, it's the most striking similarity is a self-coup launched by a leader against the government it leads, right? Mao did that to its own government and dismantled all the ministries. And it took 10 years for the Communist Party to realize what a big mistake it was. And also they were seeing how the Trump administration is silencing the media and going after law firms and all those things. It's like so strikingly like a strikingly similar feeling. It's really. I know China is a one-party state, and the U.S. is a liberal democracy, and China. The two countries are very different. And during the Cultural Revolution, millions of people were persecuted to death. Of course, there's nothing to compare with that in the U.S. But the feeling of chaos of, a government that's willing to destroy the rule of law, dismantle the government agencies and silencing media, it's all of this just have a really weird vibe. A journalist, her pen name is Jiang Xue. She was an investigative journalist in China, and she came to the U.S. a few years ago. And she said, I just feel, it's like I am overwhelmed by this sense of familiarity. I feel like as if I'm back to China.
Wow. That is really difficult to hear. And the way you described it as a self-coup is very vivid. We understand what you're saying. You talk about the media. So last question. What do you think the effect on the Trump administration shuttering Voice of America, Radio Free Asia, etc., those kinds of media that the Americans provided for the rest of the world to get information, certainly in dictatorships and when all they had was state-run propaganda?
Yeah, generations of Chinese, me included, we studied English from Voice of America's special English program. And along the way, we learned, we listened to the news and we learned about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness as ideals we are entitled to. And we also, listened to the news. I went to college in 1989, and we were in a dormitory of 7 girl students, right? And we were all poor, but each of us had a shortwave radio, and we listened to Voice of America in the evening and in the morning. And that was right after the massacre of Tiananmen Square. And what we listened on Voice of America contradicted the narratives of the Chinese government. And that made me think about, that one was my first suspicion of whether the government was telling us the truth, right? Yeah. Of course, I wasn't fully convinced, but that has the seed of doubt. And I talked to a dozen Chinese who told me similar stories, from a Stanford economist who is now 74 and who listened to Voice of America during Cultural Revolution, to people who are still in their 20s. And they all said the same thing. It's the U.S. government, by silencing Voice of America and Radio Free Asia, the U.S. government is giving up the soft power. It's giving up the ideas of war. It's really a very sad thing for many of us.
Yeah, and it was such a gift that the Americans gave the world, particularly people like yourself. And what a vivid description. And of course, here in the UK, the BBC World Service has historically provided that service as well. And so many people learn the truth. And now if that's being silenced by America, it is very sad. Li Wan, thank you so much. Thanks for your expertise there.